The broom slipped from his hand the moment the code blue call shattered the hallway. Without a badge, without a second glance, they had assumed he was a cleaner, until the trauma doors swung open and Dr. Marcus Ellison stepped in to do what no one else could. By the time the blood was cleaned and a life was saved, they would never look at him the same way again. He walked into Silvercrest Memorial Hospital at 6:02 a.m., ready to save lives. They saw a cleaner. It started with a broom, not a scalpel, not a stethoscope, not a chart. A broom. Dr. Marcus Ellison had always believed that the first impression sets the tone, and yet here he was, standing in the staff hallway of one of Scottsdale's most prestigious hospitals, being handed a broom by a nurse who didn't even lift her eyes from the clipboard she was scribbling on. "There's a spill by the cafeteria. Could you take care of it before visitors start coming through?" she said, distracted, her voice brisk like she was talking to background noise. Marcus blinked. His duffel bag was still hanging off one shoulder. He wasn't wearing a name badge yet, the hospital hadn't printed it, but he was dressed in standard-issue surgical scrubs, identical to the ones everyone else wore. "I'm actually," he started, voice calm but firm. Before he could finish, another voice cut in, sharp and impatient. "No arguing. Floor's a mess and it's about to get busy," said a woman in business slacks and a navy blazer, her hair twisted into a severe bun. Her name tag flashed when she pointed, Laura Whitman, Director of Operations. Marcus turned to face her fully, standing his ground. "I'm Dr. Marcus Ellison," he said evenly, not raising his voice. Whitman gave a dry, humorless chuckle, as if he had told a joke she had heard 100 times. "Look, whatever they call you at your other job, here you clean up first. Then maybe we can talk about performance bonuses." The broom was still in his hand. For a moment, Marcus just stared at it, feeling every second stretch into a small eternity. He glanced around, security guard at the front desk, 2 residents nursing coffee cups, another nurse tapping at a computer. No one said a word. No one even looked uncomfortable. Marcus exhaled through his nose, feeling the old, familiar knot tightening in his chest. "I'm not janitorial staff," he said more firmly. "I'm the new trauma surgeon. I'm scheduled to round with Dr. Keating at 7 o'clock. That made Hannah, the nurse who had handed him the broom, finally look up. "Wait, what?" The hallway fell into a stunned hush, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck bristle. Even the security guard shifted awkwardly in his seat. But before anyone could apologize, before anyone could fix the slap of embarrassment hanging in the air, the hospital intercom cracked like a gunshot. "Code Blue, Trauma Bay 2. Dr. Ellison to Trauma 2 immediately." "Code Blue." Hannah's clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Whitman's mouth parted, searching for something to say, but no words came. Marcus didn't wait. He placed the broom against the wall carefully, adjusted his grip on the strap of his duffel bag, and walked past them, steady and deliberate, disappearing through the swinging double doors that led into the heart of the hospital. They didn't move. They didn't follow. But the silence they left behind was louder than anything Marcus had heard all morning. He found the trauma bay by instinct more than signage. The air inside was already heavy, thick with urgency, antiseptic, and fear. A young man, maybe early 30s, lay crumpled on the stretcher, barely breathing. Blunt force trauma. Car accident. No seatbelt. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the crisp white sheets a deep, angry red. Nurses worked feverishly around him. A tech was fumbling to set up a crash cart. Another resident hovered uselessly by the doorway, paralyzed by the sheer chaos of it. Marcus dropped his bag by the wall, snapped gloves onto his hands, and moved toward the patient like he'd been born for this exact moment. "Vitals?" he asked sharply. "BP 60/30, dropping. Pulse 30. Pupils sluggish but reactive," came the reply. "Prep for emergency laparotomy," Marcus said, already scrubbing in at the side sink. "Where's Dr. Keating?" "Stuck in an oar." "You're it," the nurse said, eyes flickering with fear. Marcus didn't flinch. Inside the operating room, there was no time for second guessing. There was no room for pride or resentment. Only skill. Only precision. Only the next heartbeat that needed saving. Scalpel, he said, extending his hand without looking up. The surgical tech obeyed instantly. The first incision was clean, confident, slicing through layers of skin and muscle. Retractors. Suction. Clamp. The team fell into rhythm, moving like parts of a single machine. A ruptured liver. Bleeding out internally. Marcus called it quickly, his voice steady as rock. Clamp here. Suction there. We're losing him. Pressure, now. His command snapped the team into action. The panic narrowed into a sharp, surgical focus. Marcus thrived here, in the thin, brutal line between chaos and control. Outside the glass window, Hannah stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. Whitman stood rigid, arms folded so tightly across her chest her knuckles turned white. Neither said a word. Neither moved. Marcus didn't notice. He didn't care. He was somewhere else entirely, inside the storm, steering it with nothing but instinct and training. Minutes bled into an hour. The patient's vitals, once a whisper, grew stronger under Marcus's hands. When the last clamp clicked into place and the bleeding was finally contained, Marcus allowed himself a small breath. Stabilizing, he said. Prep to transfer to ICU. The team around him nodded, moving with crisp efficiency now. No hesitation. No doubt. Marcus peeled off his gloves, flexing his hands, feeling the tight sting of adrenaline starting to fade. The young man on the table, Ethan Morales, 31 years old, construction foreman, father of two, was alive because Marcus had been in that room. Because he hadn't frozen. Because he hadn't let assumptions define his worth. As he exited the OR, Marcus caught a glimpse of himself in the stainless steel paneling, surgical cap askew, sweat shining on his forehead, blood spattered across the front of his scrubs. No broom. No mop. Just the hands that had pulled the stranger back from the edge of death. He changed quickly in the locker room, tossing his bloodied scrubs into the biohazard bin, pulling on a fresh pair. The locker room was cold and sterile, but right now it felt like the only place he could breathe. He sat heavily on the bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. A broom. Of all things. The rough wooden handle still haunted his palm, like a ghost he couldn't shake. He had seen this story before. Had lived it in Kansas City during his residency, when a family asked how long he would be shadowing the real doctor. In Philadelphia, when another surgeon casually suggested he looked too young to be on staff. In Dallas, when an elevator full of colleagues assumed he was maintenance staff. Each time, it cut a little deeper. Each time, he bled a little quieter. Twice as good for half the respect, that was the rule no one bothered writing down. Marcus took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He thought of his mother, working double shifts at the nursing home to put him through medical school. His father, who once told him, "You don't get to be tired, son. You get to be excellent." He opened his eyes, tightened the drawstring on his pants, buttoned his scrub coat. In the mirror, he saw a man who had earned every thread of the title stitched onto his chest, Dr. Marcus Ellison. Trauma surgery. He gave himself one nod. Just one. Then he grabbed his stethoscope, his clipboard, and headed back into the halls of Silvercrest Memorial Hospital, unaware that the first impression he made today would ripple far beyond these walls, and that for some, it would be the first time they truly saw him. The hallway still smelled like antiseptic and burned coffee when Marcus stepped out of the locker room, his fresh scrub stiff against his skin, his body heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. He had barely made it 5 steps before he heard hurried footsteps behind him. He didn't turn right away. He didn't have to. "Dr. Ellison," came a voice, soft, hesitant. Marcus stopped. He turned slowly to find Hannah Lawson standing a few feet away, wringing her hands together like a nervous intern. Her clipboard was tucked awkwardly under one arm, and she looked anywhere but at his face. "I'm really sorry," she said quickly, voice wobbling at the edges. "About earlier." I didn't know who you were. Marcus studied her for a long moment. He wasn't angry anymore. That had burned itself out on the operating table. But he wasn't going to make this easy either. It wasn't about the broom, he said finally, his voice low and steady. Hannah blinked. I know, she said in a small voice. It was the fact you didn't even ask, Marcus continued, each word deliberate. You saw me, and you decided. She nodded quickly, shame coloring her cheeks. I'm sorry, she said again, almost whispering it. Marcus gave a short, clipped nod, then turned away without another word. He didn't need her apology. What he needed was for it not to happen in the first place. Before he could reach the trauma wing, another voice stopped him, this one tighter, more rehearsed. Dr. Ellison, Laura Whitman called, heels clacking against the polished floor. Marcus stopped again. Whitman approached with a forced smile stretching her lips, a look Marcus recognized all too well, the expression of someone about to make a professional apology she had practiced in the mirror. I wanted to apologize formally for this morning, she began, folding her hands neatly in front of her like she was speaking to a donor instead of a man she had humiliated. There was an unfortunate misunderstanding. I hope it won't affect your impression of Silvercrest. Marcus said nothing, letting the silence stretch until Whitman shifted uncomfortably. We're holding a diversity and inclusion seminar next week, she added, her voice overly bright. We would be honored if you would consider speaking. Your perspective would be invaluable. Marcus's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'll think about it, he said evenly, then walked away, leaving Whitman standing alone in the hallway with her well-polished regret. He found himself drifting toward the trauma wing, not because he was needed there, but because it was the only place that made sense right now. The smell of blood, the beeping monitors, the frantic urgency of saving lives, it was clean in a way apologies were not. As he passed the nurse's station, a woman leaned casually against the counter, arms crossed, chewing cinnamon gum like it owed her money. She was small, compact, and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen everything twice. You must be the new hotshot, she said without looking up from the chart she was flipping through. Marcus paused. Depends who's asking. She looked up then, dark eyes sharp and assessing. Marisol Vega. Head nurse. Trauma floor. She extended a hand, and Marcus shook it, feeling the strength in her grip. Word travels fast around here, Marisol said, popping her gum. You made quite an entrance this morning. Marcus snorted softly. Not exactly how I planned it. It never is, she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She sobered then, her gaze steady. You handled it better than most would have. Marcus shrugged, exhaustion seeping into his bones. What's the alternative? Throw the broom at someone? Tempting, Marisol said dryly. She tucked the chart under her arm and leaned in slightly. Listen, don't let it eat you up. We've all been there. Some of us more than others. Marcus met her gaze, reading the history layered behind her words. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. You thinking about doing that seminar? She asked. Marcus exhaled slowly, glancing down the hallway as if the answer might be waiting for him there. Feels like a trap, he admitted. Marisol chuckled, low and knowing. It is. They want the speech. The heartfelt story. The brave doctor overcomes bias. They want to clap and feel better about themselves. She paused, her voice softening. But maybe someone actually listens. Maybe a resident thinks twice next time before sizing someone up. Marcus didn't answer right away. The memory of the broom still itched in his hands. I don't know, he said finally. I'm tired of being the lesson. Then don't do it for them, Marisol said simply. Do it for the ones coming after you. Her words settled into him like stones dropped into water, sending ripples he couldn't quite ignore. Before he could respond, another figure approached, a young man in blue scrubs, shifting nervously from foot to foot. He couldn't have been more than 27, sandy-haired, a fresh badge clipped crookedly to his chest, Dr. Evan Rhodes, surgical resident. Dr. Ellison? Evan said, voice cracking slightly. Marcus turned, bracing himself. I wanted to say, I watched you in the OR this morning, Evan stammered. And, it was incredible. The way you stayed calm. Took charge. I've never seen anything like it. Marcus studied him carefully. Evan flushed under the scrutiny. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I assumed things too. Before. And I'm sorry. Watching you, it changed how I see things. A lot. Marcus didn't let him off easy. He let the silence press for a few beats. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. Remember that feeling, he said quietly. Next time you look at someone and think you know their story. Evan nodded quickly, relief flooding his features. I will, he said, almost whispering. Marcus watched him disappear down the hall, the kid. Practically jogging away, and felt something shift inside him, small, but undeniable. Maybe Marisol was right. Maybe planting one seed was enough. Maybe that was where real change started. He leaned against the counter, feeling the familiar ache settle deep in his bones. Marisol tapped her chart against the desk lightly. You'll kill it, she said. At the seminar. Marcus shook his head, smiling faintly. I haven't said yes. You will, she said with certainty. You already have, you just don't know it yet. He let out a low chuckle, the sound rough around the edges. Maybe he had. Maybe after all the years of swallowing it down, pushing through it, cleaning up after other people's assumptions, it was time to speak. Time to stop pretending it didn't sting. Time to tell the truth, not for pity, not for applause, but because it mattered. Because silence hadn't protected him before. It wouldn't protect the ones coming after him either. Somewhere deep in the hospital, the overhead speakers called out another page, another emergency. Life moved on, indifferent and unstoppable. But for Marcus Ellison, something had shifted. Not enough to change the world overnight, but enough to take the first step toward something bigger than himself. Enough to stop being invisible. Enough to finally be seen. The days leading up to the seminar passed in a blur of shifts, surgeries, and muted hallway glances. Marcus could feel it everywhere he went, the subtle, awkward nods from residents, the careful way staff now addressed him, the sudden respect that clung to him like a second skin. It wasn't the kind of respect that came from knowing someone, but the kind that came from fearing you had been seen behaving badly. Marcus didn't care much for either version. He hadn't accepted the seminar invitation officially, but somehow his name ended up on the flyer anyway. Keynote speaker, Dr. Marcus Ellison, trauma surgery. Big bold letters, printed and taped across the staff bulletin boards like a neon apology. He found it ironic. One moment you were mistaken for a janitor, the next you were the hospital's poster child for progress. Still, Marisol's words kept coming back to him, tugging at the edges of his thoughts like persistent waves against a stubborn rock. Do it for the ones coming after you. The morning of the seminar, Marcus stood alone outside the double doors of Conference Room B, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his lab coat. Through the heavy doors, he could hear the low hum of conversation, the occasional clink of coffee cups, the shuffle of folding chairs against linoleum. He could almost picture the room, rows of cheap chairs, a podium nobody wanted to stand behind, platters of cold bagels sweating under plastic wrap. Another mandatory seminar. Another checkbox on someone's administrative to-do list. But today, his story was on the schedule, and whether anyone liked it or not, they were going to hear it. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders, and pushed the door open. Heads turned. Conversation stumbled into silence. Marcus didn't flinch. He walked steadily to the front of the room, ignoring the podium, choosing instead to stand a few steps beside it. His presence alone shifted the air in the room. First row, second row. All the way to the back, faces stared at him with a complicated mix of curiosity, discomfort, and something else he couldn't quite name. There was Laura Whitman, perched stiffly at the end of the first row, lips pressed into a taut, diplomatic line. Hannah Lawson, somewhere near the middle, her eyes already glistening. The young resident, Evan Rhodes, sat ramrod straight, like he was bracing for impact. Even the security guard from that first morning was there, arms folded tightly across his chest, his gaze flickering between guilt and defensiveness. Marcus let the silence stretch a little longer, just enough to make them uncomfortable, just enough to clear the room of any illusions. Monday morning, he began, his voice steady, someone handed me a broom and told me to clean up a spill near the cafeteria. A few people shifted in their seats, clearing throats, fiddling with pens. Marcus continued, not sparing them. I wasn't wearing a badge yet. That's true. But no one asked who I was. They didn't need to. They had already decided. He let that hang there, sharp and heavy. It wasn't anger I felt, he said quietly. It wasn't even surprise. It was exhaustion. The kind that piles up year after year, moment after moment, when you realize it doesn't matter how many degrees you have on the wall, how many lives you've saved, or how early you show up for your first day. Some people will look at you and see only what they expect to see. No one moved. No one dared. I've spent over a decade studying, training, sacrificing, Marcus said, his voice gathering momentum. I've missed birthdays, funerals, lost relationships, lost time, all to become the best surgeon I could possibly be. And still, the first thing some people saw was not a doctor, not a professional, not a colleague, just a man holding a broom. He glanced around the room, letting his gaze settle briefly on Whitman, who looked away. I'm not ashamed of hard work, Marcus said. I've done plenty of jobs in my life. But I didn't endure everything I've endured just to be reminded, on my first day, that to some people, I'll never look like I belong here, no matter what's stitched on my coat. A ripple of discomfort ran through the crowd, but Marcus didn't let up. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. That's not my job. Guilt doesn't change anything. What changes things is recognition, responsibility, the willingness to look at your first impressions and ask yourself why. His voice softened, but the weight of it only grew heavier. Ask yourself why you make the assumptions you do. And if the answer doesn't sit right with you, then fix it. Not because someone forced you to. Not because it's a seminar topic. But because it's the right thing to do. For a long moment, there was only silence, broken only by the low hum of the air vents overhead. Then, from somewhere near the back, a single pair of hands started clapping. Slow. Uncertain. Then another. And another. Until the whole room was filled with an uneven, reluctant applause that somehow turned real, swelling like a tide they couldn't stop. Marcus stepped back, letting the sound wash over him, not smiling, not basking, just standing there, a silent challenge in human form. As he made his way down the side aisle, his gaze caught Marisol's. She gave him a small, steady nod, the kind that said everything without saying anything at all. He nodded back. Outside, the hallway was mercifully quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Marcus leaned against the cool metal of the wall for a moment, feeling the adrenaline drain from his body, replaced by something heavier but cleaner, a hard-earned peace. His shift started in 20 minutes. He had charts to review, patients to see, emergencies that wouldn't wait for anyone's enlightenment. Silvercrest Memorial Hospital would not change overnight. He knew that. He wasn't naive enough to think a single speech could wipe out decades of assumptions baked into every layer of the system. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was carrying the weight alone. Somewhere in that room, maybe one resident, one nurse, one admin would remember the way it felt to sit there and listen. Maybe they would think twice the next time they saw someone who didn't fit their picture of belonging. Maybe they would stop, ask, listen, see. Maybe that would be enough to start. Marcus pushed off the wall and headed toward the trauma wing, his step steady, his heart steady. Not because the world had changed, but because he had reminded himself of something important, that he belonged, whether they saw it or not. And sometimes, the hardest battles weren't fought in operating rooms or emergency bays. Sometimes, they were fought in quiet rooms with cold coffee and folding chairs, where the hardest thing you could do was simply stand and speak the truth. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. In every hallway, in every workplace, and every room we enter, assumptions walk in before we do. Sometimes they are small, harmless. Other times, they are sharp enough to wound without a single word spoken. Through Dr. Marcus Ellison's story, we are reminded that it is far too easy and far too dangerous to judge someone by nothing more than a glance. It's easy to see a person's clothing, their skin, their posture, and decide who they must be. It's harder, but necessary, to pause, to question, and to truly see them for who they are. The real lesson here is simple. First impressions are powerful, but they should never be final. As human beings, we have a responsibility to confront our internal biases, not just with grand gestures, but in the quiet moments where our first instincts rise. We must challenge the assumptions we make without evidence, the labels we silently apply, the barriers we unconsciously build. To anyone who has ever felt overlooked, misjudged, or unseen, you are not alone. Your worth is not determined by someone else's assumptions. You carry within you the power to change perceptions, not by shouting, not by shrinking, but by standing firm in your identity, by doing your work with excellence, and by refusing to let others define your story. And to those listening today, I offer a piece of advice: be slow to judge, quick to ask, and even quicker to listen. The world does not change because a policy is written or a seminar is held. The world changes when individuals, one by one, choose to see each other fully, without the blur of bias. It's not enough to say, "I don't see color" or "I don't make assumptions." We all have blind spots. Growth begins when we admit that, and when we work to see clearer, kinder, and deeper. At U.S. Justice Story, we believe that stories like Marcus's are more than just narratives, they are mirrors. They reflect who we are and who we can become. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here, for opening your heart to these moments that ask us to be better. Your willingness to listen, to reflect, and to grow is what fuels real change. From all of us at U.S. Justice Story, we are deeply grateful you're part of this journey. Keep questioning. Keep learning. Keep being the reason someone else feels seen.